Go.
Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone is doing good this evening. I'm just going to give you guys a few moments to log in and get situated. Okay, welcome to everyone from around the globe to Dr. Cameron's 10th Lyme Disease Science Conversation. My name is Candace, and I'll be leading Dr. Cameron's discussion and Q&A tonight. During this Lyme disease science conversation, if you have any questions, please feel free to write your comments below the video. Tonight's Lyme disease science conversation is titled, Where are the ticks and what are the diseases they carry? So let's get started and welcome Dr. Cameron as he's about to start tonight's Lyme disease science conversation. Dr. Cameron?
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I've been with my practice for 31 years. So this has been a very common question I hear all the time from my patients. Where are those ticks and what's in those ticks? Now, just to show you how old I am and how long I've been around, is that in the 70s, Dr. Steer said, "Hey, there are ticks. He didn't even say that. He had two housewives in Connecticut who said there were some kids that were sick. They had swollen knees. They were ill. Something was wrong. Dr. Steer at Yale said, well, let's call it a cluster. There's somebody that's sick and a number of kids are sick. They didn't know what it was. A few of those kids and young adults had a tick bite. So it took until 1982, about 7 years later, for Dr. Bergdorfer. He's a researcher who spent his entire life looking at ticks, and he was a rickettsia specialist. But he said there wasn't a rickettsia in these ticks. There was a Borrelia, that a certain type of spirochete that was in the tick. And so at this point, he published it in 1982. That's why it's called Borrelia burgdorferi, after his name, Dr. Bergdorfer. Quite a mouthful. And that was 1982. Now, I came in practice 5 years later. By this time, it was known that there was a problem with a tick. There was a spirochete in a tick, that doxycycline seemed to be useful for rickettsia, but it was also useful for this tick. So in that year, when I had my first 3 patients and I treated with doxycycline, I sent one of my patients up to Dr. Steer in Boston, and Dr. Steer said to the patient, well, there are other antibiotics that seem to work for Lyme. Why not try amoxicillin? So began and led me on this journey as to what's in a tick and where are those ticks. So now I'm here in my practice. We know there's spirochetes. Now, it didn't take very long for scientists to look in that tick and see what else is in there. That's why you hear about Ehrlichia, Ehrlichia. And just when I was used to 2 different types of Ehrlichia, the type of Ehrlichia that would affect monocytes and a type that would affect granulocytes. So I used to have to know about Ehrlichia with HGE and HME. Then they changed one of the types of Ehrlichia to anaplasmosis. So now I had to have 3 different diseases: the spirochete, Borrelia burgdorferi, Ehrlichia, and a certain type of Ehrlichia called anaplasmosis. Still, doxycycline was a reasonable treatment. But along the way, there was a Dr. Krause and a number of colleagues he worked with on the shore who said there's a parasite called Babesia in the same tick. Babesia microti is the one that seemed to be causing the most problems. So for years, there was always a standoff. Dr. Krause and colleagues would say it's on the coast. Dr. Horowitz and I would say, no, it's in the Hudson Valley, which is in the New York area. So for years, I've been taking care of the parasite Babesia in this tick. Now we know from the latest reports from Krauss and his colleagues that up to 40% of people in the Northeast United States have Babesia. Babesia is in ticks all over the world, and it's a very important cause of disease. So let me go back to that first question. Where are the ticks? So even though I'm practicing and I've been taking care of patients in the New York City area, in the New York Hudson Valley, and we concentrate so much on the black-legged tick. This black-legged tick officially is called Ixodes scapularis. And in that tick, sure enough, there's Lyme, the Borrelia burgdorferi, Ehrlichia anaplasmosis, and Babesia. But along the way is that people always would say, well, the ticks are here. They're not going to move. They couldn't go south of Interstate 287 because they're on deer. The deer can't get across that freeway without getting run over. So we're protected. The deer are going to stay in our area. The ticks aren't going to spread. We're going to contain them in New York. That's it. The feeling at the time was that deer that carried these ticks, moved these ticks around, couldn't get across the Hudson River. The Hudson River is too strong. The deer couldn't get across. And so these ticks that would be on the mice, that would be on the deer, that's what I call them, deer ticks. We were told not to worry because we didn't have a spread of ticks to worry about. Now, of course, since I was in practice, I had plenty of people that were coming across the Tappan Zee Bridge from New Jersey, from Pennsylvania, where they had ticks over there. Even though they were told there weren't any ticks in those areas, they're there. And there are people south of the interstate that had Lyme. So the ticks have been around. Now, what doctors did not always understand at that time is that ticks could move on birds. And so when you don't factor it, you forget that birds can travel for miles and miles and drop a tick off at another location. So they have found by looking at birds, the best study on birds was a study at our border in Canada, where they looked at birds crossing to Canada every spring. And they found that some of those birds had ticks, not just deer ticks, but deer ticks with this infection. They found 1.5 ticks. Of course, I don't know how you can have 1.5 ticks, but on average, 1.5 ticks per bird. So that meant that at least 50 million deer ticks made it to Canada every spring. Maybe as many as 150 million ticks made it every spring. And when a tick makes on the back of a bird or leg of a bird to Canada, they don't always come back. They take residence. You could say they're illegal residents in Canada, set up shop, set up home. I've been to conferences in Canada a number of years ago where they said they didn't have ticks, weren't seeing infected ticks. And it was kind of a surprise because there's so many ticks in America, right on the border. Why didn't they cross? Well, now we're finding plenty of ticks in Canada, and as well as plenty of ticks in other parts of the country. Now, birds go both ways. They don't always go north. Some of the birds, instead of going that way north, come back south. And they don't all stop in my area. They can go in a number of locations. So the CDC, they don't have patients, but they certainly have other goals of tracking where ticks are. They identified 10 states they thought where the ticks were. Most of those in the Northeast United States, some in the Midwest, like the Michigan, Wisconsin area, and perhaps in California. But these 10 states were targeted. All the money, all the resources were going to these states looking for these ticks. That's why we got money to find Lyme, Ehrlichia anaplasmosis, and Babesia in those states. Now, because there's so many resources in that area, because there's so many doctors aware of Lyme, is that the CDC seems to find most of the ticks in the area, but the problem is you don't find ticks unless you have boots on the ground. You need to have people there looking for ticks and looking what's in those ticks. So when I look at ticks, I was working on this book, Lyme disease ticks on medicine. A number of articles were popping up on where are ticks. So I wanted to read to you a little bit of where these ticks are, if you look. So in chapter 14 in the book, that's titled "Entomologist Ill After Dragging for Ticks in Georgia." So Dr. Kerry Clark, who's an accomplished entomologist from the University of North Carolina in Jacksonville, he was collecting ticks and studying ticks his whole career. That's his life. Mine is treating patients and writing, but he spent his career. And when he was looking for ticks, he just happened to get bit by a tick. And during that, a tick drag, where they run a piece of cloth over the ground looking for ticks, he became ill after dragging for ticks in the Georgia area. So he wrote that he suffered from intermittent pounding headaches, fatigue, odd twitches, and fuzziness as he was talking to the Discovery magazine. He tested positive for traces of Burley Burgdorferi and another distinct genospecies called Borrelia andersoni. So this was a good example of, if you have somebody with boots on the ground, hopefully those boots on the ground don't lead to being personally infected. So we're hoping that entomologists in Georgia and other places can look, study, find out what's in a tick, find out new species, but not get bit. Unfortunately, he got bit, he got sick, but he was kind enough to share his personal struggle with Lyme as he worked through his disease, as he worked through studying Lyme. And fortunately, he didn't sour on Lyme. He continues as an entomologist looking for what kinds of ticks are in the South, what are in those ticks in the South. He has the PCR and DNA sequencing, so he's a great person to have in the South. He also was one of the key persons that said that ticks don't care where they get a meal. We always think that they're going to be on mice, on rodents, on birds. Well, what he showed was they seem to like lizard blood also. And so it was interesting, the wild lizards, how important they were in Florida, South Carolina, and Maryland. Now, a second article that I thought was rather interesting that I shared in my book were a bunch of researchers in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So even though there were Lyme cases in North Carolina and the mainland, these people were looking for ticks in the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and they had been studying these ticks since 1991. So for 18 years, they were studying these ticks. They found that there were 16 isolates. That means the different strains, and 98 to 99% of the DNA was very similar to the classic northeastern Borrelia burgdorferi sensu stricta, the most classic of the Lyme. They found these ticks on rice rats, white-footed mice, and marsh rabbits. And so they found that given that there's ticks out there, is they suspected that there would be cases, but often it happens in the South. If you keep hearing the same narrative, the same message that there's no ticks there, there's no Lyme there, there's no infected ticks there, then the doctors don't report those cases to the CDC. The CDC only knows about cases if a doctor agrees that there's Lyme in the area, agrees that the patient has Lyme. The doctor has to get a big piece of paper out and fill out a long form and send it to the CDC, and then the CDC has to count the case. Sometimes the CDC isn't sure if they should count the case if they don't have ticks in the area. So it's kind of a catch-22, because it used to be that they wouldn't count a case unless they could prove there's 2 ticks in that county. But you can't prove there's 2 ticks in the county unless you have an entomologist who's brave enough to go out and look for 2 ticks in that county. So you end up getting all this undercounting in those states in the South. Also, it takes money sometimes to get cases reported. And if the CDC puts all the money into 10 states in the Northeast, in the upper Midwest, there's no money to help count cases in the South. So this paper of the North Carolina, I thought was a good demonstration that the ticks are there. We may not hear about human cases, but ticks are there, infected ticks are there. And we're talking about back to 1991 when they started the research. The next chapter that I wanted to touch on was Ohio. In this case, I've run into this a lot of times, even though Ohio is maybe 11 hours, 12-hour drive to my office, is I have people come to my office to get treated for Lyme disease because they go to the doctor, they're sick, they have a big workup, but the doctor says, well, we don't have Lyme in Ohio. So in this paper, this study group said we're about to run out of money. We could study ticks. We've been looking at ticks. We've been looking at ticks for years, and we have a lot of black-legged ticks. There were a lot of deer ticks on mice. There's a lot of deer ticks on the head of deer during hunting season. And they said there's larva ticks, nymph ticks, and adults, all stages of Lyme in Ohio. And so they said that the map of cases in animals, in pets, where the ticks are, where the infected ticks are, shows certainly Lyme has made it to Ohio. I always suspected Ohio had a problem, not because of my patients alone, but because every state around Ohio had plenty of cases. The next paper I wanted to mention was Tennessee. They found that there were a lot of cases of Lyme in Tennessee that weren't reported to the Tennessee Department of Health. So they found that at least 7 times higher, more cases in Tennessee never got reported. And then they did a second study to prove it. And this time, there were 19 times more cases in Tennessee than ever got reported to the Department of Health. My concern in these states is when you hear that whether it's Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, is that there's a lot of cases out there. And the last state I wanted to mention was Kentucky. In Kentucky, they found deer ticks in 59 out of the 120 counties. To get these ticks, they looked at 794 white-tailed deer that hunters captured. They had 2 black bears on the top of there were 2 black bears killed by cars. They had ticks. And there were 2 field biologists that were also getting bit. So they took 6 ticks off these 2 field biologists. So remember I talked about the Florida guy who had been bitten and volunteered his tick for the study? Well, these were 6 more ticks taken off these biologists. And so fortunately, they are also studying these ticks. So as they went through Kentucky, looking at how many cases there were of ticks, they also found that these ticks were infected. And now I want to shift from the southern U.S. And start moving north, because there's a huge number of cases in the Virginia, Maryland area, Pennsylvania. I can tell you that I grew up on a farm in Minnesota where there were plenty of dog ticks. But every time they do research now, they're finding that ticks are moving, the ticks are traveling, and I'm finding an increasing number of my family members, cousins, second cousins, that are getting Lyme disease. And there are deer ticks, an increasing number of deer ticks in Minnesota. It's not only something that's important to me in my practice in New York, to my family in New York, but now it's important to my family in Minnesota. So this career I've had of 31 years of working with ticks with Lyme disease is certainly coming home. I'd like to now go north to Canada. There was just a recent study that didn't make it in my book where doctors in Canada worked with some citizens, people who weren't professionals, and they all worked through how to collect ticks in the New Brunswick, the St. John, New Brunswick area. And they found that there were 47 larvae, 372 nymphs, and 15 female adults that were collected. So that meant they had all the life cycles in this area. And 15% of those ticks had the Borrelia burgdorferi by PCR. That means they had the same types of ticks, same types of infections we had on the US side of the border. But one particular yard, they found over 100 ticks. In this case, the ticks were obtained by flagging the vegetation, that is running the cloth across, removing ticks from the flowers that they picked from the backyard, and collecting ticks from household cats. And so at the end of the paper, they found that, yes, there were ticks, yes, there were infected ticks, but the professionals were only finding 1 or 2 ticks. The citizen scientists, these are volunteers that were helping find ticks, could find over 100 ticks in the same area. And so what the author said is that given there's only 1 or 2 ticks by a professional, not to worry, that you shouldn't have tickophobia. And they use the word tickophobia, which apparently must be a word they coined to be afraid of ticks. But if in the same area there's a yard that has 100 ticks, I think that's perhaps why many of my patients are concerned when they go outdoors, when they send a kid outside, when their pet's spending time outside. Will they run into a yard with lots of ticks, or they run into a yard with not so many ticks? The next chapter from my book had to do with more of a paper from the Emerging Infectious Disease. And they were looking at not just state by state, they were looking at the whole country. They found that if you looked at mainland United States, that 44 out of 48 states had Lyme by their criteria. The only states that didn't have it were Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And if one looks at the literature, it seems like that there really isn't a state in the United States that doesn't have ticks. So it's when you get into these little subtleties, you find doctors kind of fight over which ticks count, which infected ticks count, what kind of ticks there are. The author of this paper did say that the lack of tick records from a county, and often there's no records. That means if you don't have a record, don't see a tick, that doesn't mean that it's not there. They just haven't looked. So you'll find in the maps by this researcher that in the west of the Mississippi over to the Rocky Mountains, there aren't as many ticks. There aren't as many reports of ticks. There's not as many problems with those ticks. But they're telling you right there in the paper is that there aren't that many entomologists out there looking for ticks. At least they haven't reported the ticks. In this paper, they would only publish, and when it's officially done, the authors have published the paper. The paper has been accepted by a journal, and the scientific community is accepted in those areas. So I think it's you're going to find that these ticks out there are growing. Now, most of my discussion today is on the black-legged tick, which is called Ixodes scapularis. So if you're joining me late, I'm Dr. Daniel Cameron. I'm the host and leading this Lyme disease science conversation on where are the ticks and what's in those ticks, what diseases they carry. So besides the black-legged tick, there are other ticks like the Lone Star tick. The Lone Star tick has like a white dot on its back, and it was discovered in a Lone Star state. But whenever you discover it in one place, those ticks actually start showing up in a lot more places than you ever would dream. So even in our area, the Northeast United States, Lone Star ticks are there. Now, once again, when you try to keep track of what's in a tick and what ticks are there, is that there never seems to be enough entomologists in every county to look at what ticks are there, what's in a tick. The other thing is, just when you learn which tick is the problem, where the ticks are moving. The birds are moving them around, the deer are moving them around, animals are moving around. So all the facts that I'm talking about today about where the ticks are is subject to change. There's also a Ixodes scapularis related tick on the West Coast called Ixodes pacificus in the California, Oregon, Washington area. If you look at Europe, there's something called Ixodes ricinus. And so when you look around the world, there's a lot of diversity of different types of ticks. I can't begin in this conversation today to cover every tick and every disease in those ticks. There's also the dog tick. Some of them carry diseases like we're worried about Rocky Mountain spotted fever. But I wanted to bring up another section. This question is not only where the ticks are, which can range from Canada down to the whole South, the West Coast. We don't know about the Midwest as much because there's nobody there, is what's in a tick. Now, remember I started the discussion about early in my career was Lyme, the Borrelia burgdorferi, Ehrlichia anaplasmosis, and Babesia. They found a Babesia-related problem in California called Babesia duncani, which is a similar type parasite on the West Coast. Just when you get it all straightened out, that when you get it worked out that Babesia microti is on the East Coast and Babesia duncani is on the West Coast, then you start getting the various Babesia in the wrong place. If you look for duncani on the East Coast, you'll find it. And so there's quite a mixture of ticks. There's quite a mixture of organisms. In the tick, there's something called Bartonella that is a rather complicated problem. We've gotten to know Bartonella because cats have mites. Mites poo. Cats scratch the Bartonella from this poo, this mite poo, into somebody, and they get in their arm or hands, they might get a cat scratch fever from this Bartonella. But it seems as if Bartonella is showing up in ticks in some locations. In some locations, people seem to be showing up with Bartonella. Now, the research is a little bit confusing because how do you know what's Bartonella from a cat and what's Bartonella from a tick? So we haven't worked all that out. I'm still reading about that information. So just when you think we got that all worked out, we knew powassan was a virus in the tick. Is that since 2004? So that would be 14 years ago during this conversation, is that they've identified another 7 completely different pathogens, different organisms in these same ticks in the United States alone. There's something called Borrelia miyamotoi, which is a mouthful, Miyamotoi, Miyamotoi. Now, this type of Borrelia was known to scientists in a tick, and they thought this was a bug that was symbiotic. That is, it just was there. It wasn't giving anybody trouble. It wasn't bothering anybody. They would study it. But Japan came along and said, no, that's not just a bacteria. That's a bacteria that causes a disease in people. So now they started developing tests for Borrelia miyamotoi. We don't completely know about the bacteria in people until we get better tests. But some symptoms are similar to Lyme. It's in the relapsing fever family. So the question is, does it have any relapsing nature? Does it have any fever to it? It's certainly not the kind of fever you might expect in some common illnesses. So now we have Borrelia miyamotoi, which is a very common bacteria in a tick, but it's also increasingly common in people. So just another mouthful of an organism to learn. That's important. And but stay tuned, because just when you hear that Borrelia miyamotoi is around, that gets spread much quicker. The tick doesn't have to be attached near as long for someone to get infected. Then you run into several viruses that have been identified more in the Midwest. The Heartland virus in a tick, Bourbon virus, Borrelia mayonii, Mayonii. The reason they call it that is because it was discovered at Mayo. And these are, as viruses, something that we always are concerned with in a tick, just like we were with powassan, because there is no treatment for a virus in a tick. So far, we just treat symptomatically. If somebody suspects that you get sick with a virus from a tick, you better be careful, because there could be a traditional bacteria, atypical bacteria, or parasite in a tick. And then there's a couple new Rickettsia strains called Rickettsia parkeri, Rickettsia species 364D. So you can see how it's new enough not to even have an official term. And then Ehrlichia miris is another bacteria. So in this case, is that it's hard to always keep up with every tick, where the ticks are, what's in a tick. So in practice, so often is that you're going to find that doxycycline takes care of most of the bacteria and that's in a tick most of the time. But I have to hedge on most of the time, because just when you think that doxycycline is going to work, given the complexities of bacteria in a tick, it seems like not everybody gets better with doxycycline. Sometimes they have to go to amoxicillin, azithromycin. If Bartonella turns out to be an important tick-borne illness, there's some treatments for Bartonella that we learned from cat scratch fever. But all around, if one looks at treatment, just because we have a plan, we treat now, I always follow up with patients, because I can't be sure that doxycycline is going to work. I also find in children under 8, I might have to start with amoxicillin first. In that case, I worry about treatment for some of this rickettsias and some of the Ehrlichia and anaplasmosis. In any case, I have to highlight that any of these treatments don't work for Babesia. Babesia microti from the east, Babesia duncani from the west is a parasite. And doxycycline is not going to work for it. Amoxicillin is not going to work. Zithromax is not going to work. You have to do something for a parasite. That's why you hear this generic name called the Trobaclone mixed with Zithromax. In America, they might call it Mepron or Malarone. The reason that we use Zithromax with it is that so many people with Babesia have some other tick-borne illness with them. So essentially is that as you try to get to understand what the ticks are, what's in a tick, is that you have to clinically be aware that trying to come up with which combination of infections in a tick, what combination of infection the person has, and come up with some treatment plan, and then follow up to make sure that that patient is better. Now, anything I tell you today could easily change as we get more entomologists, more biologists studying ticks, because there happens to be at least 3,000 counties in the United States. So can you imagine me trying to consolidate the results of even 1,000 counties and distill it down to this conversation that we're having today? And I also have to distill it down to my patients. What do I do with the patients in front of me, knowing what we know about ticks, what we know is in a tick, and make the best decision for that patient. That's why I thought today it would be useful to at least give you an overview of what's in a tick, where those ticks are, and how it comes back to the tough decision as a doctor on what to do for my patient. Even though this is, I happen to be centered in the New York area, is that if I look at the international community, so many of the ticks, so many of what's in a tick is similar in so many parts of the world, is that, you can drive yourself crazy reading about the literature that seems to be endless. Now, there seems to be an endless amount of papers out there discussing what's in a tick and where the ticks are. Just be aware that just because we don't know if there's a tick in the area, if there's some infection in a tick, is stay tuned. I think any time you hear a doctor says there's no Lyme in the area, and there's no Lyme in that region, that county, is that often if you look a little further, you're going to find, yep, there are cases. Yes, there's literature to support cases in that area. Just as one more example, is years ago I read about a study in Mississippi, and what they found is that infected ticks were not found in the summer like we find in the Northeast. They were all taken off people and turned into the scientists in December, January, February, and March. So this is just a reminder that just because we focus on the Northeast United States on ticks in the summer, spring and summer, early fall, other parts of the country, there are ticks in other seasons. One last study I wanted to mention is that this had to do with a study that looked at a blade of grass, some grass, and a little circle about this big around. And they let the ticks go up a piece of wood and down a piece of wood. And they found that the ticks would go up in the air on top of the wood if it was a reasonable temperature, there was good humidity, and they would drop down during the hottest and driest weather. So the implication is that in the southern United States, where it can get kind of hot and dry, is a smart tick who's going to survive and make it to his next to life is going to stay up here waiting for a meal when it's not so hot, during the winter or late fall. And when it gets too hot in the summer, they're going to go down that pole or blade of grass. And so it's a reminder is that when you look for a tick at the wrong time, look for infection at the wrong time. Sometimes Lyme can show up at rather odd times just when you think you're safe. So I think that as we close on where the ticks and what diseases are in tick, this is really not the end. This is the beginning of a discovery process of what's going on. If you find a doctor says, oh, we don't have ticks in our area, or we don't have infected ticks in our area, that people don't have Lyme in our area, you can always get a second opinion because doctors are divided. Doctors are not all in the same pages. But if you hear blankly, rather quickly, that there is no Lyme, there's no ticks there, no infection, second opinion gives you an opportunity to have a second look with the doctor at what is known. Then you'll be able to more comfortably make a decision about whether to look at a tick-borne illness, whether to look at what's on your pet, what's on your child, and make the best decisions, and then decide how you want to treat it. Because not that everything is Lyme, but there's certainly enough Lyme out there. If you get that opinion, get a second one, and so you have that second chance at understanding Lyme disease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over to Candace, and who's been patiently waiting for me to go on and on about a rather exciting topic, ticks.
Oh no, this topic is very, very interesting and very good too for all of us to know, especially with this time of year. The ticks are more alive and alert this time of year. So it's good to get that information so we are aware where the ticks are, what to do, what to look out for. It's good information and good insight for all of us. As far as questions tonight, I guess nobody has any questions tonight. Just wanted to let you guys know that if you do have questions, and if you can't remember what question you have, you can also send or forward your question over to Dr. Cameron's social media accounts. His Facebook page, Daniel Cameron MD. His Instagram page is Dr. Daniel Cameron. Twitter, Dr. Daniel Cameron. And also on his YouTube channel, if you wanted to keep up to date as far as when new videos are posted, rewatch his other videos, as well as some older series, you can tune into Dr. Daniel Cameron. Just type that into the YouTube, subscribe, and give him a thumbs up. Also, thank you guys and all you guys for tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, and also on his webpage as well. We just wanted to let you guys know this coming Saturday, June 9th, 4:30, between 4:30 and 7 o'clock, is Dr. Cameron's first book signing. This is his book, the one that he was talking out of this evening. You can purchase this book on his, I don't think it's up on your web pages yet, is it? It's not up on your web pages yet, is it, Dr. Cameron?
The link, there's still a link. There's still a link to getting it on Amazon, but at some point we're looking at directly purchasing it through us, a signed copy, and because there's so many people out there that have been supporting what we do in our office, our staff, for over the last 31 years. It's been a blessing to be part of history, to be involved within 5 years of Dr. Bergdorfer's discovery of ticks, to see so much research done. But it's also kind of nerve-wracking to know how far we have to go, especially if we have to go to every county in America to go through the same process of what ticks are in that area, what's in those ticks in those areas. Then it's a challenge.
All right. Also, just to touch on that subject, as I said, June 9th, this Saturday, between 4:30 and 7 o'clock at his office. If you've RSVP'd, we look forward to seeing you. If you have not RSVP'd, you can head over to his Facebook account, which is Dr. Daniel Cameron. Just type that into Facebook. You'll see a link that says event. If you just click RSVP, we're going to be closing the RSVP off on Thursday so that we can give us an estimated head count of how many people will be coming in so that we have enough food and refreshments for everybody. We're also going to be having games, so it's not going to be your typical book signing. It's going to be fun. Dr. Cameron is a fun person. If you know him and if you're a patient of his, you'll know that he likes to make jokes and laugh. He's not always stern all the time. So just to give his personality out there as well, we're going to be doing games. As well as, of course, book signing. He will be speaking on a topic that night. So come on out, bring your family, bring your friends, co-workers, whoever you would like to bring. It's free. There will be games and prizes, as I said before. And yeah, that's about it. Dr. Cameron, do you have anything else that you wanted to say tonight before we close out?
One item is that if you have a tick on you, take it off. But you should be careful because there are certainly all these stories of burning a tick off, putting some kind of something irritant or Vaseline on a tick. But they've shown that the typical deer tick, the Ixodes scapularis, is not very happy if you mess with it. It'll throw up and spew all kinds of bacteria in you. So don't grab it by the belly. Don't burn it. Don't put anything on it. You should try to get below the head and take it off with a needle or with some kind of device that you can get under. If you have a tweezer, make sure you get it by the head where it's attached, and that'll help a great deal. Don't just wait till the next day to take it off. Most people I know want to get it off anyway, right away, but be careful on how you take it off, no matter where that tick is.
Okay. And one last thing. If you do not have a Facebook account or an Instagram or any form of social media, but you do plan on attending, you can give the office a call at 914-666-4665 and just leave your name with the receptionist, and so we can get you guys well accommodated as far as with food and refreshments and have plenty of prizes and all that stuff for you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed tonight and hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. And we look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Until next time, bye-bye.